think Andrew just did my job there for me. I'm going to hand over to Rakesh now. Good luck.
Thank you, Graham. Dzień dobry. Lovely to see you all here. I'm going to start with a couple of stories before we get into the debate around is BPO dead? And those two stories, one, I just think on the back of our last session around AI, it's worthwhile mentioning what happened to Amazon a few years ago. What happened to Amazon a few years ago was that they had this wonderful idea, which was, why don't we use artificial intelligence for recruitment? Because we can reduce our number of HR staff, we can do it faster, we can be more effective if we can use an AI engine to help us take those CVs and then make the selection around the type of people that would be wonderful Amazon employees. Sounds like a great idea. Now, the problem with this idea was that there was bias. So what they recognized, they disbanded it very quickly because it had a bias against ethnic minorities and it had a bias against women. The reason it had that bias was because of the data. Because actually the data that was fed into the Amazon AI had years and years of human bias involved in making those decisions. So one of the things to watch out for when you're thinking about artificial intelligence is how good is your data? Because I'm willing to bet that many of you in this room, it's not that good. So you may just want to look at cleansing that data before you start and embark on that journey. Learn from what happened to Amazon. You can Google that story. It's an interesting one. Now back to the topic of BPO. So 18 years ago, once upon a time, 18 years ago, I used to work for this company called Accenture in their BPO space. And I did very well there. And the head of Accenture BPO at the time was a Scotsman, a Scottish man by the name of Stuart Clements. And he said to me, Rakesh, in 20 years' time, there will be no captives. There will be no internal captive shared service centers. And the reason is obvious. Because from a people perspective, we will have the most experienced people, the best career development plans, because we will have the scale. From a process perspective, we will have the knowledge of best practice across P2P, R2R, O2C, hire to retire, other functions. No one will be able to compete. From a technology perspective, we will have the experience and the know-how of the best technology that no one will ever need to set up captives in 20 years' time. So it's just interesting. 18 years later, we're not having a conversation today is, are captives dead? We're having the conversation around, is BPO dead? And I don't think that's going to change in 2 years. So how wrong a lot of people were back 18, 20 years ago around the state of the industry today. And the reason for that, I have to say, is actually BPOs haven't developed as much as they probably could over the last 18, 20 years. And there's some other reasons as well that we'll go into today. But in terms of our session, what we're going to do is we're going to have a quick conversation around, is BPO dead? We're going to have a bit of a vote to see what your view is at the moment. I'm then going to share with you some industry stats around what's really happening in business process outsourcing. And then my esteemed colleagues, Shemek and Graham, are going to lead a debate. So Graham is going to be pro-BPO, and his role is to convince you that BPO is a good thing and it's not dead. Shemek is going to be anti-BPO, and his role is to convince you that BPO is terrible and you should only have a captive setup. And at the end of the discussion, we're going to have another vote to see if any of you changed your minds. So, shall we go to the Mentimeter for the vote? So, is BPO dead? Who thinks today BPO is dead? It's unnecessary. It's just throwing cheap resources to India or offshore locations, doesn't add any value. It's not what's needed by organizations. And who thinks actually, there is a place within our organizations for outsourcing? There is some good that can come from it. Okay. So it looks like, Shemek, you're going to have a tough job today. So 5, 6, okay. So we're looking at all 7 out of 54. Oh no, the numbers, now you're all voting quite late. So let's say about 9 out of 60, which is about 15%. I did a maths degree for a good reason. So about 15% of the room feel that BPO is dead, and 85% of the room feel that there's definitely a place. So Graham, your job will be easy. Shemek, your job may be slightly more challenging. If we can go back to the slides, we'll talk a little bit more around this marketplace. So first of all, for those that don't know who I am, my name is Rakesh Sangani. I am quarter Kenyan, quarter Indian, quarter Yemenis, and mostly British. Born and raised in London. I'm the founder of a boutique consultancy. I know my master's degree, 4 quarters, some of you got that. I'm a founder of a boutique consultancy called Pro Savatna. All we do is within GBS, shared services and outsourcing. Ultimately, we answer 5 questions. One is, do you have the right strategy and operating model in your GBS? We specialize in that. 2 is, how do you design the right processes? 3 is, how do you use automation technology properly and not pay too much and make sure you generate the value? 4 is outsourcing advisory, and 5 is winning the hearts and minds of people, because we all know that it doesn't matter if you have the best technology, you have wonderful processes, if you don't win over your people, your transformation will be a failure. So, let's talk a little bit about BPO. And I wanted to share just some numbers across the room around what's happening in the marketplace and why it's happening. So first of all, BPO continues to grow at quite some rate. So the cumulative average growth rate of BPO is estimated to be 8.5% a year for the next, until 2032. To take that marketplace to $544.8 billion. So it's amazing, because when I first started working in this industry back in 2001, never did we think it would grow to this scale. So it's just amazing how the industry has grown. But what's interesting is what's happening today. Because at the same time as lots of growth in outsourcing, insourcing is more popular than ever before. So organizations are bringing things back more than they ever did. So it's a bit of a paradox, because outsourcing is still growing, but insourcing at the same time continues to grow faster than it ever has. And we'll touch on some of those reasons, and I'll give you some examples, because we're working on about 8 projects at the moment where people are insourcing from their outsourcing company. We're also working on about 15 where they're outsourcing. But we'll talk about the insourcing ones in a moment. And what are the reasons? A lot of it becomes around customer centricity and having the right culture within your organization. You'll see the top reasons for insourcing being around customer centricity and around control. People, I have to say, when they outsource, there's a feeling of that loss of control. So organizationally, some businesses bring things back to feel that they have got that control again. The other thing that's interesting around this marketplace is the leaders in this space. So 10 years ago, if you worked at Accenture or Genpact or IBM, and someone said, oh, there's 100 FTE that this organization wants to outsource, they would qualify it out. Today, they'll look at even like 40 FTE. So the deal sizes are smaller. And what you see, therefore, is that you've got a lot of these guys that are the familiar names, and some you may not have heard of as leaders in the Magic Quadrant. So you have to make a decision if you're outsourcing, also the type of organization you want to work with. It's no longer just about Accenture, IBM, Genpact, TCS, Wipro. There's now some really small providers, well, they're not small anymore. They were small providers like EXL and WNS, who are now almost 1 billion strong in revenue. So the market is changing. There's lots of providers out there, and so you have a lot of choice. The other bit is you don't have to, outsourcing means different things today. Because you can choose to use an outsourcer like a recruitment agent. You could say, I want to set up in Krakow, but I don't want to do any of my recruitment. Wipro, can I get you to do all of our recruitment and just hire all of the people and then give them back to me in 3 years' time? So there's lots of different ways now you can also run these models. So just some examples. So we're working on, I mentioned, a number of insourcing projects. And a lot of the time when I mention it, the first question is why? Why did they insource? And is it because there's one company that's really, really bad? And the answer to the second one is no, actually, there's insourcing across all of the providers. So there's not one that's necessarily worse than the others. But the reasons generally are around issues with communication. Yeah, sometimes it can be difficult communicating internally with a BPO. It can be just because the outsourcer isn't motivated anymore. So one of these is like a 15-year relationship that insourced from Infosys. And they just thought after 15 years, Infosys were just not bothered anymore. And they wanted to change because there was that complacency and there wasn't that hunger. And it can be just because of new leadership. Because normally in businesses, you find some people that think outsourcing is a great idea, and you have other people that say outsourcing is a terrible idea. So if your CFO suddenly changes from great idea to terrible idea, don't be surprised if he says, yeah, we need to insource some of that work. So those are just some examples of insourcing. And then we wanted to cover some of the key trends we're seeing in BPO today. So trend number one, this is an interesting one. BPO contracts are now a lot more aggressive than they used to be. The reason for that is because of automation. So that everyone's heard of automation. 5 years ago, the market thought that we can RPA everything. Now I think there's an understanding that not everything can be automated through RPA, but because people thought that, they used to say to the outsourcing providers, a 20% headcount reduction is not enough. And what that did is it made the marketplace a lot more aggressive in terms of headcount reduction. So what you now see on these contracts is an average of about a 45% headcount reduction over a 5-year term. A 45% headcount reduction over a 5-year term. That's one of the interesting trends that we're seeing. The second one, I think I mentioned already, the deal sizes are smaller. So, when I used to work for Accenture, we used to do 1,000, 2,000 FTE type deals. Those don't really exist that often today. It's more 30, 40, 50. What does that mean for you? Even if you have 10, 20 people that you think, we've done the most we can, maybe we should outsource them, there'd still be a lot of companies interested. Whereas maybe 10 years ago, they wouldn't have been interested in that type of size. The third trend is around hybrid models. This is the prevalent trend, and I guess we saw it from the survey at the start when 85% of you said there's some room for BPO. What we're seeing, the most common model today, is where an organization has a captive shared service center and they have a BPO relationship as well. The best way that works is when you have something known as a production line model, where you have the businesses providing work into the captive then standardizing the processes, making them more stable, making them more measurable, predictable, repeatable, and then once they get to that stage, giving them to the outsourcer. So that's kind of our view of best practice in terms of a hybrid model. But yeah, definitely there's more and more hybrid models in the marketplace today. And then the fourth is access to technology. Because a lot of organizations are actually outsourcing to be able to get access to Gen AI, to process mining, to RPA, to workflow tools, to reconciliation tools, to reporting dashboards a lot quicker than they would have been able to achieve that themselves. So we're seeing, because there's a lot of hype around Gen AI at the moment, and businesses are thinking about how can they move to some of these concepts quicker using an outsourcing partner. So those are some of our trends. And I think that was the last bit of my overall market summary before we move on to Shemek and Graham. Let me pause to see if there was any questions for me before I hand over to Graham to tell you why you should all outsource. But any questions before we go to Graham? Yes. Hola.
I would have a question. Sorry. To me, the challenges or the reasons why the companies tend to insource or are not happy with the performance of the BPOs is very rarely only on the BPO side. Very often it's because the whole governance and the relationship management of the contract is underestimated by the companies. There are many people in the room, I'm sure, who have very effective relationships with the BPO, but the hard work is actually on both sides of the organization. What's your view on that?
I'm on my second marriage, and I think BPO or going into that relationship, it's like a marriage. When you get a divorce, it's not one person's fault, in reality. There is some emotion, and you like to blame the other person, but the reality is, it's not one person's fault, it's both parties. And I think a lot of organizations, when they outsource, they're not ready for it. Because we're on what we call the fourth generation of outsourcing now. But the first generation was this concept called your mess for less. So it meant that, okay, I have a mess, I'm going to throw it over to someone else, I'm going to give it to Shemek, and he's going to fix my mess and make it look really, really pretty. And the reality is that doesn't work. You have to own your mess, you have to own your processes, because it's your stakeholders, your change management that's going to make the difference. So Ola, I think it's a fantastic point, because it's as much of the blame, it has to be shared when these transactions fail, because the buyer hasn't done the right things in making that relationship work. Normally it starts on the contracting. When someone comes out of a contracting and they say, wow, I did fantastic, I got the lowest price possible, you know that relationship's going to fail. Because it should be around risk and reward, it should be around mutual partnership and how you do the best for both parties, not about screwing the other side, as it were. So I think that's right. The buyers are certainly part of the problem in those scenarios. Any other questions? Okay. Can we put the other slides on? And Graham, I'll hand over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Rakesh. I asked Rakesh to put in a good word there for BPO, and that was £20, very well spent. I think we're going to need to skip a few slides here before we get to mine. While we're doing that, okay, good. So I was interested because during the PwC survey, it said that only 6% of leaders were really looking at outsourcing in the near horizon. So I thought I was going to have a tough job this morning convincing you that BPO wasn't dead. But actually I see I've got rather an easy job of this. So that's good news, I guess. Right, anyway, so I thought I'd begin at the beginning by highlighting a few companies here with a very radical approach to core. What is core for them? I thought I'd get us started with that. So EasyJet, Red Bull, Adidas. EasyJet, they say that only their crew and pilots are on the payroll. So for them, core competency is really the guys who sit in the aeroplane. We all know about Red Bull. So Red Bull, sales and marketing, organisation only. Everything else, they outsource. And Adidas, at great environmental cost, no doubt, but they outsource all their clothing production and a great deal of other things as well. So that is, and I would imagine all three of these companies would regard contract management as one of their core competencies, along with their key business. So, it's a quick case study on BPO industry. Would anyone be able to help me and pronounce this word here? I did try and practice, but my Icelandic is no good. Does anyone remember anything about this? Right, so I think we do, yes. I traveled back in time about 12 years, and we had a volcano erupting in Iceland, which caused flight chaos. And the flights around Europe, and I think even globally, it was affected as well. And for 6 days, you had no flights. And there was a company I read up on that gave their case study of how great they were. It was a customer services company, and they highlighted that during this experience, they were able to rapidly scale up, bring in around 100 extra people onto the service desk, and basically handle all of the queries that came through on the phones during that difficult time. And they said that they had about a month's worth of volume in that first 6 days. And then they also highlighted as part of their case study that they'd expanded their scope to handle all the claims. So all the hotel claims and everything else that came through, they tackled that for 6 months. So fantastic. And I thought, well, how would that look like today if I saw that today? And that sort of brings us back to the BPO industry really needing to be about innovation and being ahead of the market. If we think about the flight industry today, the Lufthansas and EasyJets of this world, it's really all about mobile applications, self-service, automating as much as possible. Basically, the customer is in charge of what they do. If there's a flight cancellation, you get an SMS about it straight away. You get offered your refund or rebooking, and you manage that all by yourself. So in 13 years, that customer services as part of the flight industry has radically changed, and that demonstrates why I think the BPO industry is going to stay alive, because they have to keep innovating. We might see different names coming up. Some of them may stop innovating, and they will slowly die out, but others will come to take their place. Right, okay, so can BPO stay relevant? I was thinking to give you a long history about the BPO industry, but we were all there and we all lived through it. Some of us might even remember the late 90s when even Andrew was a young man. So anyway, I think to cut it short, the history of BPO is labour arbitrage, isn't it, really? We started off, we had labour arbitrage, everything was fantastic, you couldn't lose by offshoring, and then you needed to have a healthy relationship with risk. That's the idea of, okay, let's just send envelopes of documents to Poland and get them processed, and it will all work out fine. And it did, and that was the beginnings of our industry. But underlying that was always innovation. What comes next? So bringing in technology and new ways of working to drive performance. Okay, Rakesh has already talked about what's next on the innovation curve. There was a little quadrant down here 5 minutes ago which talks about RPA and data mining and everything else. I think one of the things that's already happening now is the BPOs are offering ERP upgrades. So you can get your SAP upgraded with your BPO using offshore talent at very low rates. you can buy it in bulk, and it's all highly discounted. And so that is an example of them really moving up the value chain, which obviously they need to do to survive. Okay, yeah, obviously the BPO needs, it has scale and it needs a global footprint. Of course, I'll skip through these a bit, I think. Sharing risk. So that idea of in your contract, knowing where you're going to be in 5 years' time. You've got a 5-year contract, you know what you're going to be paying every month, you know inflation is built into that, you don't have to worry about inflation anymore, and you've got contracted efficiencies as well. Rakesh mentioned 45% as an average, and I wonder if you went to your operations teams and asked them to deliver 45% over the next 5 years, well, I would expect that would be a difficult conversation, wouldn't it? Probably not one with a positive outcome. Okay, so then, yes, some advice for you, for the GBS leaders of this world. As I saw when I worked with Unilever, they would always have multiple providers, usually 2 core providers that they would work with. They would do their RFPs, they would bring in BPO consultants who knew about contract management, and they would deliver great value for themselves. Okay, so right, finally, I'm going to whiz through this, conscious of time. So, a checklist for GBS leaders. Really, what I want to highlight to you here is that as a conscientious GBS leader, you really need to keep BPO on your agenda. You need to be having those conversations, looking at where is value on the market. But not only value, I think you've got those 3 things you can get from any service provider. You'll never get all 3, so be careful. Be careful what they promise you. Is that going to... Yes, down at the bottom. Right, so you're going to get speed, quality, and price. If anyone promises you all 3, they're lying to you and they're not going to deliver on something. It might be quality, price, or speed. But anyway, you can get that value on the market and use them as a tool to demonstrate to your teams, to your leaders, or whatever needs doing, that things can change and innovation can happen. Good. Okay, I'll hand over to Przemek. Thank you.
You know, exactly that's the problem, because nobody can give you as much as BPOs can promise to you, especially in pre-contractual phase. You know, there are a couple of, first of all, I will not be talking about the low quality of work. That's a kind of a myth that exists in the business services industry, because it's the same like with manufacturing in China. People say it's low cost and low quality. The truth is that you can have everything from China, every level of quality, as long as you are ready to pay for it. As long as you are ready to pay for it. So, there are more fundamental reasons not to go for BPO model. I'll just pop up on the screen everything at the given, because actually I'll be speaking about it in a different order. Sorry. Can you reverse one slide back, please? I don't need it. Yeah, here. No.
Go back to the slides.
Yeah. No, it's further. Forward, yeah. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So when you start the contract, they tell you everything they want, because first of all, they are experts, and you are not. They have FT-based models, really FT-based models. They promise you technology transformation, anything, but there are hidden costs. On the journey with the contract, then you have a new requirement, and the business is coming to you with the new requirements, and the BPO then is asking you for additional money to pay additional FTEs they need to deliver the additional service. There's actually no flexibility, and it's well secured in the contract. On top of it, of course, as your procurement team was contracting them, they were not experts. They actually didn't notice that there were plenty of exclusions in SLAs. And then, on the daily dashboard, at the end of the month, all is green, but it doesn't work. So there is plenty of hidden costs, actually, you were not aware of when you started to conclude the contract. Even worse, you have to be close to the business. Our leaders expect business services to be really heart of the business. And also, these days, technology is shortening this distance. What was considered in the years ago as a back office, now it's really on the front end of the business together with our colleagues fighting on the market. We need to be agile. We need actually to adapt to our investment cycles in the company. When I was with Rolls-Royce years ago, to develop new aero engine, it takes 10 to 15 years. Long investment cycles, not much change. But when we are in the retail industry, we need to adapt every day. How you want to do that with BPO? They are not able, being an outsourced organization, to adapt as quickly as you can do in the captive organization. They don't have the same identity with the product, with the company. They are, you're just a customer working for Accenture, in the center, in India, in Chennai, 10,000 people, 100 is working for you. What kind of identity they have with your product, with your company? You're just one of the customers. On top of it, they want to evolve in the organization, so they change the accounts. So you have a turnover of people, and the new person comes working on your contract, and you have to train them again and again and again. So you're losing the knowledge, you're losing somehow the pace, and it's an additional effort for your in-house organization. So it's a hidden cost, and it's slowing you down in the change. Then, of course, there is this kind of a mismatch between the partners, because if you're a small customer, really, like 100 people working for you in the center of 10,000, you're not as important for them. So they will not respond to your request as quickly as they would respond to the customers who take 3, 4, 5,000 people working for them. This is really worth to consider. What is even more important is that with the hybrid work model, when they work from home, you have absolutely no control over the confidentiality of the data. You don't know how much your information is being secured. I don't know if you remember in the beginning of the COVID times, when people started to move in different locations to homes, we had really some strange situations where our actually control systems, they captured that people were doing photos with their mobile phones of the screens, etc. So really, it's out of the control. Sometimes people in the low-cost locations, they don't have conditions at home to work properly. I remember, 20 people behind the guy I was working with on the video call on Teams. So how you can assure actually the confidentiality of the sensitive information, both technical, financial, anything that can impact the competitive position of your company. And then this individual approach. As these days, everything is accelerating, also thanks to the technology. Investment cycles in the companies, in the business, are shortening. You have to react, you have to be agile. And also, to differentiate yourself, you need to have this individual approach, both to your, you can call it internal customer, your colleagues located in different locations around the globe, but also to end customers. And unfortunately, whatever we would do, invest in the BPO world, be visiting the centers which are working for you, spending some considerable time in communication, you will never have the same engagement as your own employees. Simply just by the fact that they are not your employees. They are working just on your account in others' organization. Your guys are committed in-house, in your captive centers. They understand the importance of it, and then it saves you time and money. Probably you all experience that, for example, P2P problems. It's obvious things, yeah? We all have some P2P challenges. What's the understanding of the critical payments, critical vendors in your captive organization versus outsourcing in BPO organization? It's a massive difference. The understanding of the criticality for the business, the understanding of priorities. It has nothing to do with the situation where you have it all captive. And again, it saves you on cost, reputational risk for the company as well, and then agility. One last thing I would like to underline is management difficulties. You know that we spend a lot of time when we have a contract with the BPO to manage it. We have to build all the systems, tools, contracts, legal framework to manage a BPO organization. It's really costful. Very often we do not measure it, but it's a considerable effort for the organization. I think it's not worth because it's easier now these days to have it all captive. And with the technology that is coming, to facilitate the same transformation and accelerate this transformation. Because BPO guys, they always will tell you, PowerPoint is accepting everything. We'll transform your processes, we'll standardize it, we'll make it digital, especially in pre-contractual phase. But then on the journey, you push it, next year, maybe you have to invest. And at the end of the day, like I remember when we started many years ago with my previous employer, we contracted 120 guys for some key financial processes. And then after 3 years, we realized we had 160 of them. All the KPIs and SLAs were green, and CFO was crying every single week because it didn't work. So this is why I think BPO is not the right thing to do.
Fantastic. A round of applause for Shemek. Makes a wonderful case for killing off BPO, these evil outsourcing companies who just want your money, who are just raising change control after change control when you just want to change little things that don't give you the flexibility. So great case for that. Thank you, Shemek. We're going to move into a bit of a Q&A with the team. I'm going to ask one person, and I'm going to ask for some of your experiences, actually, around outsourcing. And I might pick on the lady from Heineken to maybe talk a little bit, if she's comfortable with that. I'm not sure where in the room she is. Okay, well, why don't we start with that? And then my question to you is, which has more value?
Yeah, that was not planned.
I know it wasn't planned. I've picked on you, so apologies.
So yes, we had that outsourcing relationship. We had strategic partner from India. And I think I like that expression that you mentioned, my mess for less, yeah? So you were very right that certain things do not work, usually because of both sides, yeah? So the promise was too big, comparing to our mess, not standard IT landscape, scattered processes. On the other hand, we were expecting too much, according to the promise, obviously, but we were not looking in critical way at ourselves. Yeah? So I think we were exactly in that situation, so I wouldn't blame anyone for that. And we said goodbye to each other at some point. But not because of these difficulties, because that was everything that we could overcome somehow, but that was more because we embraced bigger transformation and we said that it would be kind of easier to do that at one place, not in two places. Yeah? So that's a bit of a story. But yes, for us, the big learning is that you have to be really well prepared, and then that works. Yeah? If you are really responsible for your own stuff first as the company. I think I partly answered. Yeah, first I would streamline, I would standardize, I will put the right technology in place, and I would be more realistic in terms of my expectations towards that deal. Yeah, so only that, and that's enough probably.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I know I picked on you there, so I appreciate that. But it sounded like an amicable divorce. These things can go amicably. But my question, Graham and Shemek, to you was, can you tell us which is more valuable, which adds more value to the organization? We understand the cost, And I think that was made clear in the presentations. But what about value? Which drives the most value and why?
Okay, in terms of the value, depends how you measure it, because really when people go for outsourcing, they want to really capture this cost savings, FT from high-cost countries, move to FT in low-cost countries, deal done, saving accrued, and end of the dream. And I think if you think about the business services, the value is lying with the proximity of the business. You need to be really close to understand. You cannot be, just the steel ball attached to the leg that the business always has to drag behind. Actually, you need to be in the front end. You need to be this kind of a drive transformation vehicle that business can use to accelerate the change and to adapt to changing market conditions, competitors. And I believe the true value of the captive organization is in it. This cost savings, cost outs, you just deliver once when you conclude the contract. And all the rest is the nightmare. So it's better really to stay with captive and drive the business, still delivering the cost outs on the journey, but delivering much more in terms of the value, just by the fact of being close to the business.
Okay, so short answer from me, it depends. Nice, easy answer. You mentioned yourself that you can have a BPO contract where you offshore it for 3 years. You see acceleration in terms of productivity or innovation, and then you bring it back in-house. So that's a kind of mixed solution that could work well. But if you're just looking at cost, I don't see that as high value somehow, right? But if you're looking at accelerating how something happens, or if you're looking at innovating, then I think that can be a way to do it. But you keep the things important to you close to you, and these are the things that should have the higher value, because it should be the things where it's going to have a top line impact.
Good. I know we're running out of time, but I think we can go to some questions from the audience. One question, and then we'll do the final voting after that. So let me come down.
Really interesting conversation. Hi, I'm Mariola. I have a question because I spent exactly 1 decade in outsourcing and another in captive. And among all these elements that you listed, I think they are all very valid. I'm missing one that in my view, should be the driver for the decision, whether it's captive or it's BPO, organizational culture. So I would like to get your view. How do you see this element, soft one, but super important, in making the decision into what's best and why? Thank you.
Shall I go first? Let me go first, and then I'll come to you, Graham. So we do this for a living, and I think it's organizational culture actually makes a huge difference. I'll give you an example. We're working with a chemicals firm at the moment, and the CFO has been trying to transform their finance function for about 2.5, 3 years. And he finds that no one is really up for it. It's just difficult. It's difficult to standardize, it's difficult to change their way of working. And they're under some cost pressure as well. So what he actually wanted to do was use outsourcing as a disruptor. It's like, look, Rakesh, what I want to do is to really bolt my organization in thinking a different way, in operating in a different manner. I want to do it quickly, and I want to get some cost benefit, but ultimately I want to actually change the culture. So that's one interesting example where outsourcing is seen as a disruption to try and improve the culture, to be more process-orientated, more cost-orientated, to understand metrics and SLAs and all of these good things. Now, I wouldn't say you necessarily have to outsource to achieve that, but it certainly allows you probably to do it quicker than you would if you went down the captive route. Graham?
I mean, from my side, when I've also worked in the BPO industry for over 10 years and also worked at captives. So I see in the BPO area that there is more of an entrepreneurial spirit and let's get things done and move faster. So I mean, it depends, and you can foster that in your own teams as well. But that was my observation: is it's a younger team, and they are hungry for success and learning.
Well, my view is that the culture, company's culture, is not only about finance and the appetite for transformation or resistance to change. It's not only this. Culture is something much wider. It's the way people communicate inside of the company, the way they collaborate, and this is really a clear value. When you outsource, it's really hard to retain this culture. It's somehow you're violating the internal culture of the company. It doesn't help. So that's one element. I think you can have your dream and aspirations that by outsourcing you may impact or change the culture because you have this kind of a strategy. But remember that what US guys, they say, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And this is very true. So culture is stronger than your business plan, stronger than your strategy. And I think this is not in favor of BPO. It's creating additional challenges to BPO. Sometimes it can be used as a disruptor, I agree, to accelerate the change. But in general, it's extremely hard, almost impossible, to transfer and implement the company's culture in BPO.
Fantastic. Excellent. Thank you, Shemek. I think we're going to go back to the question then, and we're going to assign a winner. So I think before it was 15% said BPO was dead. So if Graham's done a good job, that 15% will be lower, right? Will be lower than 15%, and then Graham is the winner. If Shemek has done a good job, then actually that 15% will go higher, right? Is that fair, or what do we think? 15. That was the initial vote, was 15% BPO is dead, and 85% said it wasn't dead.
I think we've oversold it. We oversold the BPO. So congratulations, Przemek.
Please do vote.
To be frank, this was my role to play the advocato diaboli, okay? But frankly speaking, I think there is a value in BPO in general, after the voting and everything. But not
to impact your voting at all.
I know, it may impact, but the truth is that just using the standard, business process outsourcing as it is, as we've known it for years, it doesn't make any sense. You can use it as a challenger, you can use it in a hybrid model, as Rakesh said, you can use it actually as a kind of a trigger of a change, as a disruptor, but it has to be, first, wisely used, intentionally used in this case. You want to know you have to know what you want to achieve. And then I think it has to be applied by professionals. Just leaving it to procurement teams, just contract me Accenture, because we're not about Accenture, it's just we spoke about Accenture. Just throwing in the topic like this, it's a great scenario for the big disaster.
Yeah, and I have to say, actually, it's the wrong question, to be honest, whether you choose BPO or whether you have a captive. The question you should be asking yourself is, why do we exist as a GBS? What are we trying to achieve? And how do I use third parties and internal capability to achieve that? But Andrew's hurrying us along. I think the winner today, Shemek, I think you should come over. Congratulations, you have won the BPO debate. Put your hand in the air, there we go. We'll grab your hand, there we go. Well done. Thank you very much, everyone.